Everyone, this is Ankit Mehta here. I'm part of the technical success team, and today I'll be talking about the bring your own BI reporting strategy that we are following in OPSBridge and also in other suites. So, just to give you a little bit of background first, what's the need for the bring your own BI? So obviously, there is a strong reporting demand from our OpsBridge customers, and we have had reporting solutions in some form or the other, you know, going very back early days to things like OB Performance Insight and OB Reporter. And then we have had Operations Bridge Reporter for a while. So in short, we have always had some good reporting solution within our suite, and uh, obviously, and there is a strong demand for that, and also to combine data from different data sources to provide a more holistic picture into your infrastructure performance. And in fact, that is one of the key design principles behind the optic data lake as well, right? The COSO data lake. Uh, while in the Opsbridge suite, in the containerized world, we of course have our own reporting solution in the form of BVD or the stakeholder dashboards, where we ship a bunch of out-of-the-box reports, right? However, our approach towards more advanced reporting needs, that customers have, is to encourage them to build their own reports in an external BI tool, um, you know, and the few of the popular ones that we have demonstrated as examples are, Tableau, Power BI, and Grafana. So that's essentially the background. And in order to assist our customers in this journey, right, so that they derive value out of their needs for reporting, including their advanced reporting needs, uh, we have obviously come out with a white paper, right, which enables customers to build reports in the BI tool of their choice. And the approach we have taken with the white paper is, we take some report examples and then show step by step how to build a report in those example BI tools that I mentioned, mainly Power BI, Tableau, and Grafana, right? So we have example for each one of those in the white paper, and the tools obviously were chosen with inputs from product management, and then also some of the feedback that we have received from the field, especially for example, while product management gave us inputs for prioritizing Power BI and Tableau, there was also a strong demand for Grafana, and that's what we included in the latest version of the white paper that we published after the 2010 release of OpsBridge. And later on, I will just show you quickly a glimpse of and the structure of the white paper as well. The reference over here is obviously mentioned where you can download it. It's on the marketplace. And there is also a brief write-up on it, and again, cross-reference to the marketplace from the practitioner notes through on our doc portal, right? And just to quickly make you a little more aware of the BI tools and various options within those tools that you have, in terms of licensing, what's free, what's not. So here are the three example tools that, again, we will be talking throughout the session, and also the ones which are talked about in the white paper. So, uh, Tableau, speaking of Tableau, for example, first, so there is obviously a design tool in which you first design and develop the report, right? And then once you are done with designing the report, you publish it. So Tableau includes has a design tool called Tableau Desktop, and Tableau Desktop itself has two versions. One is a fully
Yeah,
licensed
can you wait?
version.
Because I don't have time to deal with him right now. Just give him the. Oh, sorry, guys.
Okay, so yeah, Tableau Desktop itself has two different versions. One is the licensed version, which is obviously provides you the full-fledged capability to do everything that Tableau offers. And then there is a free edition called the Tableau Desktop Public Edition. In terms of what you can do within the tool, uh, they are pretty much the same. The main difference or the main limitation in the public edition being that you cannot connect to a remote database. You can only connect to local files. And obviously, for our use cases, it's almost always about connecting to the optic data lake, right? The Vertica database. So the public edition uh, doesn't meet our needs, and therefore you need the licensed version. And that's one of the reasons, in fact, why our labs for this session also only include Power BI desktop and Grafana. The Tableau desktop licensed version has a trial period of about 2 weeks, I think. But beyond that, it doesn't let you continue using it unless you buy the license. So that's the design tool for Tableau. Then when it comes to publishing, it has two solutions. One is the on-prem solution called a Tableau server, which as the name suggests, it's something you deploy in your own environment and then publish reports over it. And then they, of course, have a cloud offering called Tableau Online, right, which is the more uh, which is the more recent version and which is what Tableau is aggressively pushing. Uh, so uh, obviously, when you use the Tableau Online, the challenge is that it being on the cloud, it does not have access to your optic database if it is deployed in your own data center, right? In the Micro Focus network, for example. And to work around that, Tableau has a solution called Tableau Bridge. So Tableau Bridge is a piece of software that again you install on-prem, and uh, so and Tableau Bridge maintains a connection with Tableau Online, which then lets you query your database on-prem. So that's the Tableau Bridge solution for the Tableau Online Cloud offering. And lastly, there is something called as Tableau Public, which so if you're not using the licensed version, it's obviously again relevant mainly for your own learning. When you're using only local files using the Tableau Desktop Public Edition, then you can, to get the whole experience, you can also publish your reports on Tableau Public. And as the name suggests, it is really public, so obviously you should not publish anything confidential over there. It is really visible to everyone. Um, but that's obviously a good uh, platform for learning Tableau if you don't have a license. Speaking of Power BI, Power BI also has a similar design tool again called Power BI Desktop. But when it comes to licensing, Microsoft takes a little different approach that the desktop tool is completely free. It's not licensed, so you can do everything with it, free. So in that sense, it's very good from a learning perspective that you can download Power BI Desktop and do everything that Power BI can. Obviously, the licensing comes into picture when you want to publish the report. And again, Microsoft also has two solutions. One is the on-prem called Power BI Report Server, and the cloud offering called Power BI Service. And similar to Tableau, for the on-prem data access, they have a piece of software called Data Gateway, which you need to install to maintain live connection between the Power BI service deployed report accessing your data on-prem. And then last but not the least, there is Grafana. So Grafana uh, again has similar offerings, both on-prem and cloud offering. called Grafana and Grafana Enterprise. The Grafana Enterprise is the while a paid version, whereas the Grafana is completely free, even the on-prem version. And then they have Grafana Cloud, which is free, and Grafana Cloud Pro, which is paid service. So that's just a quick overview of various BI tools. And these are just some of the example reports built in, one of these three BI tools. So this one was built in Tableau, for example. It's a typical, standard system resource report showing you CPU and memory utilization trends over a period of time. It supports drill up, drill down capability across timelines, as most BI tools do. And then, of course, you have the typical time range filter here, a node filter. Um, and we will look at some of these reports live. So here is another report that I recently built, again in Tableau, which is showing you a tree map of CPU and memory utilization. Um, and this is more for offline reference. I will be showcasing this report live. And in fact, I will also showcase how to build this report, for example, from start to finish, starting from scratch. Here is another interesting report, which is, again, plotting the trends for the CPU utilization, both the average values as well as the max CPU utilization values over the selected period of time. And then along with it, it plots the so-called upper and lower limit, with the selected factor of standard deviation from the mean line. So, by default right now it's showing you one standard deviation. So the upper limit is one standard deviation above the average value, and then similarly the lower is one standard deviation below the average value. So it plots those upper and lower limits, and obviously these are dynamic limits, because the depending on the time range you select, the number of data samples will be different, and so the average will be different, and so will be the standard deviation. Uh, and the idea behind this report is, you want to plot the outliers, right? So it's typical from a data statistics standpoint, any data which is outside of 3 times the standard deviation is considered an anomaly, right? So the idea is to let the user do that analysis of, identifying the outliers, and maybe, dig deeper into those outliers, whether they need to be investigated any further. And to make the report a little more dynamic and flexible, it takes the factor of standard deviations that you want to consider, beyond which the outliers will be identified, as a user input. So the user can just increase the number of standard deviations from 1 to 3. And again, we will look at this report live as well. And this, it does the same thing for both the average CPU utilization as well as the max CPU utilization, because from capacity planning's, perspective, you might be more interested in the max CPU utilization than the average. Uh, this is another report, again from a capacity planning perspective, where the user provides input of CPU and memory, both high and low thresholds, and then the 4 different tables over here are just simply listing down the systems which are either below the threshold, below the respective threshold, or above the respective threshold. And then within those, it is color coding those values over the range of the min to max CPU utilization, for example, in this top left uh, table, where, yeah, it's showing you, because this is, systems with CPU utilization below the threshold, it's coloring the least utilized systems in red color, and then gradually increases the shades towards green as the CPU utilization increases. Uh, and then there's a reverse in the tables below, because it's talking about systems above the threshold. So whatever is towards the higher range is red, and then increases towards or shades towards green as you drop down. Uh, all the previous reports were in Tableau. Here is a Grafana dashboard example, and there is one of the labs included. So you would build something similar in the lab. But this is again a cross-domain report, for example, right? So over here you have data coming from, the events data, which is OBM, is streaming into COSO or of the optic data lake. So basically, open events, in progress events, and closed events. Then some of the top systems from the CPU utilization perspective, and similarly with the memory utilization. And then here is some data with the breakdown of worst performing transaction with data coming from BPM. Here is a dashboard which is built in Power BI. Again, it's an event summary dashboard which shows you various event related data in one dashboard, so you get a good overview of your uh, overall events in OBM, and the resolution rate, the correlation rate, the incoming trend, and all of that in one snapshot. So over here you have number of open events currently, what's been your average closure time overall uh, for the period that you have selected over here. So over here, this example is over last 30 days. How many total correlated events, and then vis-a-vis the number of events received, it gives you the correlation ratio, and the average response time to each of the events, right? And then over here, it's a breakdown of total incoming events by severity, and then total closed events by severity, and then the same incoming events trend, right? So the bar chart that you see over here is only showing you the critical and major incoming events, right? And then the black line trend you see is the total incoming events each day. And then the green line over here, I think it's talking about the average response time for the events. So these are just some example reports and dashboards to give you an idea of things that customers can do in BI tools, and use cases that they can achieve, right? Um, Here is another dashboard on the events data, which is, I guess, more useful for the OBM admin, probably because you want to analyze, which are your most noisy policies in this top left corner. So it's showing you the top policies that are contributing the maximum number of events, right? And then similarly, the top right corner is showing you the top most noisy CIs, and then similarly by CI type and by event type indicators, right? So in one snapshot, it gives you a good overview of all of that. So before we go into lab exercises, I would like to showcase some of those reports, some of these reports live, right? And then we will also look at one example of building one report end to end. So I hope you can also see my Tableau desktop that I'm sharing right now. Okay, so let's look at this example first. So this is the example report I spoke about, which talks about the outliers, right? So I already explained what the report shows, and there is also a description over here which talks about, gives you an idea about what the report is showing. So here is the area where the user can interact with the report, right? So right now, as you can see, my average is 51.4 for the CPU utilization average percentage, and then one standard deviation upper limit and lower limit. If I want to analyze for two standard deviations, the user just increases the factor of standard deviations. And as you can see, the upper limit and lower limit have adjusted accordingly. And now there is only one outlier sample for the period that I'm reporting on for last 30 days, right? And you can go up to three standard deviations, but then I don't have any data which is outside of three standard deviations from the mean. So I go back to one standard deviation because that's providing me a little more outliers and the report is a little more interesting. And then over here, I have node selection because you want to do the outlier exercise, obviously, for one specific node at a time, right? So the user goes ahead and makes the selection for different nodes. Okay. So that's the outliers example we looked at. And again, like I mentioned, you might be more interested in doing that analysis only on the maximum CPU utilization as opposed to the average. Here is the other one, a very simple report, but can be quite useful from capacity planning perspective. So again, the user, you know, provides the input of what's my low threshold. So if I decrease this low threshold, you will see that the number of systems in this table, which lists down the systems with CPU utilization below the threshold, decreases, right? Uh, as I increase the low threshold, obviously, it increases the number of systems below that threshold. And similarly for the other ones, currently I've set the values just to have my tables more populated, because obviously this test environment is not really busy in terms of the CPU and memory utilization, especially not so much for the CPU utilization. Uh, so CPU high threshold, which is this bottom left corner here, as I increase, as you can see, I have just two systems which have CPU utilization above 5%, and therefore I'm keeping it as 0 just to show more data. And then similarly, you can play around with all the other thresholds. And here is the tree map, which I showed. And this is the example which I will be running through for, end to end, starting from scratch, to give you a good idea about how to go about building the reports. Obviously, I think one of the key things which I missed mentioning during the slides is that when you're building the reports in an external BI tool as opposed to consuming the out-of-box reports in BVD, you obviously need to be well aware of the underlying schema that is there for you to fetch the right tables and the right columns. And there is a detailed documentation which is there, which talks about our schema in detail, right? So you can refer to that, including the semantics of each of the columns. While we follow a naming convention, so most of it should be self-explanatory. There is nevertheless a good explanation for each of the tables and fields. Okay, so I think this report is again self-explanatory. Like it says, it's a tree map. In the top part, it's showing you the CPU utilization tree map, where the size of the box is determined by the number of CPUs on that server, and the color is dictated by the actual value of the CPU utilization. So the lower the value, the greener the color, and it increases towards red um, as the CPU utilization increases. As you can see in the legend over here, it's showing you the range. In the actual report, obviously, you would keep this range from 0 to 100, but just to have little more color variations in this sample report, I have left it to my min and max values. And similarly for the memory tree map, the size of the box is determined by the amount of RAM on that server, and the color shading by the memory utilization value. Okay. Just very quickly, another event dashboard example. Now this, while some of these top metrics is similar to what I already spoke about, a sample dashboard, where it talks about various things like number of open events, average closure time, correlation ratio, average response time. And in this left pie chart, you have the incoming events distribution by severity, right? So currently I only have, incoming normal events and warning events. I increased that to 3 weeks. And as you can see, I also get some minor events. So all that is there. But the interesting part which I wanted to showcase in this report is this bottom right corner, where as you can see, it's talking about total incoming events versus the JVM free heap memory on my OVM, right? And so the bars are actually the number of incoming events over the period of time that you have selected. So in this case, 2 weeks. And this line over here is plotting the JVM free heap memory along that timeline. The reason I wanted to show this is that obviously this JVM free heap memory metrics isn't coming from any of our out-of-box collections, right? OVM is obviously streaming only the event related data, and then from the agent we are only collecting the system resource related metrics, like CPU memory, network utilization, disk file system, and so on. So what we have done in this environment, for example, is as you all might know, OBM has a self-monitoring content pack, which among other things also monitors the JVM for the heap memory usage, including the free heap memory, the heap memory utilization, and so on. And so we have configured this setup, which is on AWS, to add this custom metrics collection of the JVM metrics into the Optic Data Lake. And now I'm including that custom metric collection also in my dashboard along with the other out-of-box data that is collected. Right. So this is just to give you an idea. This could be a common use case for customers building custom reports in their own BI tools when they want to include also custom metrics that they are either collecting or streaming into the Optic Data Lake. Okay, so with that, I will now, uh, you know, so Alexi, do we pause for questions in between, or I just continue and take questions only at the end?
So whatever you find convenient. If you are changing the topic entirely, then it's better to stop and ask and wait for questions in relevance to what you showed, and then do it again at the end.
Yeah, exactly, because I'm now going to switch to report building, so I would pause here for any questions people might have.
So there were some questions in the chat. Mainly, do we have those reports available for us?
Yes, so the way both Tableau and Power BI work is that whenever you build a report, there is obviously a corresponding template. So Tableau, for example, calls it a Tableau workbook. So we can make these workbooks available. In fact, our plan is actually to also upload and publish these workbooks on Marketplace, the same place where we have published the white paper. So you can just download those workbooks and just edit the connection parameters to connect to your database, and voila, you should have the report ready. And then yeah, it might be easier to just customize those reports to your needs and then starting from scratch, as long as it meets your use case.
All right. And I think there were no additional unanswered questions in the chat. So let's continue with the content.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to start from an empty. So I'm using Tableau, for example, as you can see here. So I'm starting from a completely empty canvas. So I'm going to start right from scratch. I'm going to build that report which I showcased, which is this CPU and memory utilization tree map, right? So first and foremost, obviously I'm going to connect to my COSO database. And this is using the same AWS setup which we have been using for all the demos so far. Okay, so here I have my connection and the corresponding schema. So all our metrics data goes in this schema called MF shared provider default. So that's the one you will be almost always selecting. Unless you have some metadata reporting needs, then you would go to one of these other schemas. And then you have all the tables which are currently in my schema, right, in my COSO database. So since I want to do the tree map on my CPU and memory utilization data, so I'm going to choose the node metrics table, right? And I'm going to use the hourly summarization, so the 1H table. So as I briefly mentioned, we have a naming convention for all of the tables, right? So for example, this table over here is for OPSBridge, which is corresponding to the agent data source. And from the agent data source, this table contains node level data as opposed to the CPU, for example, which contains data for the individual CPUs. And then the 1H, where the H indicates it's an one hourly summarized data. And then similarly, we have 1D, which is daily summarized data in that table. So within Tableau and also in Power BI, you have the option of maintaining a live connection, or you can extract the data so that you are sort of offline and then you continue working and interacting with the report for whatever data you have extracted into the tool, right? I'm going to continue with the live connection for now. Okay, so I have my data available, and then I go into something called as the worksheet, which is where you will do all the report designing. So I'm interested in my tree map for CPU utilization, memory utilization. So let's start with CPU utilization. So obviously I want my node name because that will be one of the things for which I will be showing the metrics. That will be my dimension essentially. And let's find the CPU utilization average. Yeah, so that is here. So I'm going to just double click this and include it in my report. Now, as you can see, by default, it has used the aggregate function called sum for my CPU utilization, which is obviously not what we want. So I'm going to change this to average. And right now it's just listing a table, but I want a tree map. So this is as easy as just me pointing to the various visualizations and selecting this tree map, right? Now, by default, you can see that it has sized the boxes by the value of the CPU utilization, and that is indicated by over here. So as you can see, there is a size mark over here with this icon, and that icon is next to this CPU utilization average value. So that is what is determining the size of the box right now. And the same matrix is also determining the color of the box. As you can see over here, this is the color palette against that same metric. But our need is that we want to determine the size using the number of CPUs on each of those servers, right? So let's find that. So here it is. Here is the metric which gives me the CPU count. Now, over here, obviously the average min max doesn't make sense because it's just a constant value, right? So but to be on the safe side, I'm just going to use the max value, right? And I'm going to drag and drop this on my size mark. So as you can see, this host, for example, which has the highest CPU utilization, had the biggest box previously, and now it's not so big because it has, okay, first of all, as you can see, it's showing me the CPU count as 4516. That's because, again, by default, it has chosen the function of summation, which I need to change to maximum. And now you can see that the number of CPUs on this server, for example, is only 4, versus this big box is the one which has 16 CPUs, both of these, right? And then this one has 8 CPUs and so on. Okay, so we have determined the box size correctly using the CPU count and the color coding using the CPU utilization value. So that's good so far. And we can play around a little bit later with the color coding if you want to change the color palette. If you want to essentially indicate and highlight the high utilized systems in red, which is typically the use case, as also how our Cloud Optimizer used to do. For example, if you're familiar with the tree maps from Cloud Optimizer, then we can change the color palette from here, which we will do a little later. Okay, couple of things from a visualization perspective. Since we are sizing the boxes by CPU count, it might be more user-friendly to also show the CPU count upfront along with the node name in the label, as opposed to only when I mouse over. So we can select the same metric, and instead of changing the function after selecting the metric here, I can also do that over here. So I'm going to do that here and change that to using maximum, and I'm going to drag and drop the same metric also on the label. So now, along with my node name, it also shows me the number of CPUs on each of the servers. Okay, with that done, the other thing typically I would want is to include a time filter, right? Because I want to analyze at different points in time over different time ranges, as opposed to analyzing and including all of the data uh, in my database. So while I can do that using a time filter, since we want to uh, do this analysis also for both of the charts, one for the CPU utilization, memory utilization later on, both of them combined, what is going to be more user friendly is to actually make a parameter, right? So I'm going to do that quickly, where this parameter will essentially take the input of the last how many days you want to include for your analysis, right? And this is going to be just integer with the range minimum 1 and maximum of, I don't know, let's say 3 months, so 90 days. Okay, and the step size of 1. Okay, so I have defined this parameter called last n days. Now I'm going to show this parameter so that the user can interact with it, and I want the option for the user to directly type in the value rather than having to slide it, right? So user can now change this directly like this. Now obviously this is not making any difference right now because I have not linked this parameter to my time filter. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a calculated field called date range, in which I will give the filter of my timestamp being greater than or equal to, so whatever is the last n days input that the user has given, right? So over here I include a date add function for subtracting the days, and I want to subtract days as opposed to weeks or months or hours. And how many days do I want to subtract is what is provided the input by the user. And since this is actually a subtraction, I'm going to make it negative. and then that is last n days parameter, and then the from which date you want to subtract, so that is obviously from today onwards. So that's my date range which I've defined, and now I'm going to include this date range as the filter, right? Okay, and only when the condition is true, as in all the timestamps which match the condition that we gave. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And now you will see some of the color shades slightly changing, as in when I give a different time period. So if I give 7 days, as you can see, this one changed the color a little bit. And if you want to remember the values, for example, for this biggest node, my average CPU utilization is 3.88 versus when it is 30 days, it is 3.83. Similarly, I can go up to 90. That's the maximum range we have given, right? So, so yeah, we have done that. Now added this time range aspect to the report as well. And now we will do the same thing for memory utilization. While building this memory utilization, I'm going to show you another aspect that how you can add multiple data sources within the same report and link them, right? So I'm just going to show you how to add a new data source. So within the sheet, I just said add a new data source, and I'm again connecting to my same database, same schema, and I'm going to pick the OPSB sys infra node 1H. Okay. All right, with my data queried, now I come back to my design place. I start with node name and my memory utilization. Where is that? That's here. And I'm going to first go ahead and mark it to use average right here and include that. I'm going to say please use tree map. Again, by default, it's using the memory utilization value for sizing the box and also for color coding. We want it by the amount of RAM, and which is, where is it? Here it is, my memory physical max. Again, I'm going to mark the default as maximum, and I'm going to use that for sizing. Okay, so now as you can see, this one again had the maximum memory utilization. So from being the biggest box, it's the smallest box now because its memory is only 8 GB versus these have 62 GB and 32 GB. And again, I also want to include my RAM amount in my labels. So the same thing, I'm going to drag it to the size. Oh, that I had already done. I'm sorry, I need to drag it to the label. So where is it? Okay, so you can see the memory capacity along with the node name now. And then we have already defined the parameters. So I'm going to say show the parameter for this chart as well. And I'm going to also define the date range field for this guy. Name it a little more appropriate to distinguish between the two. Not tenant, timestamp. Okay, so and I'm going to again make it very little difference, so you can't make out. Let's see if I make it 90. Oh, okay, of course I have not added filters, so there's no way it's going to make that. Okay, so I need to add that filter here. Okay, 90. Yeah, you can see the shades changing a little bit. Okay, and I guess the last thing I'm going to do is change this color palette to the red green, which is the most commonly used. I want my higher values to show up as red versus what it's showing me over here. So I'm going to reverse this color coding and I'm going to increase the number of shades that I want. So 25 steps, for example, right? So there you have it. And the same color coding I'm going to apply here as well. Okay, and so now you have both of these charts ready, but I would of course like to show them together in one dashboard. So then I'm going to create a new dashboard. I'm going to create a title for the report. Right. Later, let's just put a placeholder for it. And I'm going to include these two. So typically I would name the sheets something more meaningful so that I know what I'm picking and including in the report. Okay, this is my user input parameter. This is my legend. And I'm going to include this as well. Okay, and cover the full view. Bring my legend here. Okay, and I'm going to give this a little better title. Okay, some better title over here as well. Just to indicate what is determining the color and the box size. And you could do the same thing for the memory. So yeah, so you have your report ready, and now since this parameter is used by both of these reports, as and when I change this, both will, you know, uh, affect both the charts for the selected time period. So last 7 days and whatever it is, right? Okay, and then of course you can do various purification for on which you can spend as much time as you want. And then here is what you can have a final report, for example, right? You can play around with the background for different components, right, placements and so on. Okay, so I think that's all I had in plan to talk about and showcase. Any questions on this before we move to the labs?
I have a question. Thank you so much going through the detail. This is very, very helpful. I have a lot of customers using Power BI. So if you bring up back Power BI, what data source you're using when you go and add your data sources? We're talking Microsoft Power BI we had before. Yeah.
Right.
No, this is still Tableau.
Yeah, I know this is still Tableau, but so we will look at the lab Power BI. I can actually open Power BI as well. Give me a minute. But the data source part is, irrespective of Tableau or Power BI. I mean, when you ask about data source, are you talking about the
The
tables
connection.
or
No, the
the
connection
connection?
type.
Yeah, so Power
So
BI also has something similar called, I mean, it has Vertica as well. So let me just open my Power BI.
all right,
Just give me a
and
minute.
nice background though.
It's the default one. Okay. Okay. So here is my Power BI
Excellent.
from
So if we go
scratch.
to data
So I
sources,
say get data, right?
Ah.
And Vertica is not listed here. So I say more.
and you would have the Vertigo with this greenish icon, I think.
Yeah, there is my Vertica.
Right. And when you connect, in here, you're going at it with the ODBC driver, right?
Here we don't
So-
require actually. We require when you're trying to connect with the Linux. Sorry, Ankit. So I thought of telling it.
Yeah, no worries.
So you have two connections type, right? So you have import and direct query. Do we support both of them?
Yes. I mean,
Okay.
irrespective of whether you use the import or direct query, the connection aspects don't change, right? So I provide here my Vertica server name and my database name, which is ITOMDB, typically the default one for COSO database. And then you choose whether you want to import or direct query. That doesn't affect your database
Right.
connection parameters. When you say OK, it's going to prompt you for the credentials.
Let
right?
us say cancel in here, say back, and select query. Yeah, back, and select direct query, and say OK. Will this work?
Yes, this will work as well.
Okay. Now, did we test it with the gateway? So basically, the Power BI allow you to connect via a gateway, right? And one of my customers, they're not use the direct connect in here, so they go to the Power BI gateway, and they will have to configure it like they manage gateways, and they add the Vertigo connection on the gateway. Have we ever tested that?
So I have done the same use case using Tableau, where Tableau has something called as Tableau Bridge, right? And you also do similar in Power BI, is that when you're designing the report, you still design on-prem. So your Power BI desktop can directly access the database. It's not going via the gateway. And when you're publishing that's when you configure it to use the gateway. But personally, I haven't tried the Power BI gateway. I've tried the Tableau Bridge. And it's fairly easy that when you're publishing the report, before publishing, you just say start the Tableau Bridge for this report as well. So that's essentially just telling the Tableau Bridge to maintain a connection to the data source defined in this report. And then the Power BI Online just talks to the uh, Tableau Bridge for that connection. And I would
So,
imagine something similar for Power BI. I
okay.
don't know, Dhananjay, do you have experience with the Power BI gateway?
I have some screenshot of it
So
in case
we
it
have
helps.
not checked on the gateway part, but it should be straightforward like Tableau, Ankit. So it should work actually logically when you're trying to use a Power BI gateway as well, like how the Tableau gateway is working. It should be working there. But in my setup as well, I don't have a gateway setup to test it on current scenario.
Okay.
Yeah, I have the same problem basically, but at any rate, if you didn't test it, you didn't test it. If it would be nice if this is something you guys can look at, but yeah, I need to get back to the customer on this, and basically I sent him to support to submit a support case on it. Now, okay, excellent. The other question that I had is in the chat room. So basically for Grafana, right?
Yeah.
We ship plugin, and Arun answered the Grafana piece of it, but we
Mhm.
ship plugin 2.0 and 1.0, right? Now, if I go to the Vertiga website, they say these are tested with Vertiga database version 9.3. We support 9.2. I installed this, it works, but officially it is not supported. Did you see this before? Is this an issue? Do we support the connector for Grafana to run on the top of Vertiga 9.2 that ITOM support, at least for operations bridge and NOM?
If I may take this question, Ankit.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So, Vertica Grafana data source is an open project, and it is not released by Micro Focus. It is a project openly available in GitHub. Although the developers are Micro Focus internal, but due to various reasons, they did not, the release, the plugin did not see a light of the release internally. So it went external and is made available on GitHub. So from a supportability,
Got it.
perspective,
You're cutting off. I don't know if it's only me, but I can't hear you anymore.
am I clear? Kit, can you confirm?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, so from a supportability perspective, if you're asking, the plugin is an open source project. From a bring your own BI concept perspective, for Grafana, this is the only plugin available today. And as a technical possibility, we have mentioned that you could use this plugin, work on top of 9.x or even 10.x Vertica, and the plugin works well. We have seen it on various versions. I have run it on other 10.x, other ITOM products, which are using Vertica as a database. I have plotted data even there, and it works. So it is not a version limitation at all. But from a supportability perspective, the plugin is an open source project, so it's not really supported. It's just a technical feasibility that we are showcasing here.
Mm. Yeah, I know it works because this is what I have on my system. But yeah, we have, if customers use it, we want them to be supported somehow, and I'll talk to the product team to see how we can work around that. So thank you so much. This answered my question. And again, I mean, fantastic demos. I'm really delighted you guys took the time to show us that. Thanks.
Okay, no problem.
Welcome.
One thing I just wanted to point out is that the end-to-end report building, which I showcased, we have also done a recording of that, and that recording, I believe, would be made available to you so that you can just refer to the building process offline.
Yeah. It would be nice to have this on YouTube so we can point customers to it, right? So they can reconsume this fantastic work you did. Yeah. Maybe this is something Alexei can do his magic out there and put it. Yeah.
Well, there are several options here. We can either host it on my channel or we can host it on technical enablement channel, but just give you the URL, because all of our videos, including the ones that are recording during the course, like right now, are unlisted. So you cannot search for it by yourself, but if a pre-sale definitely can show it to a customer under supervision. So what version would you prefer? Like publicly accessible, searchable content, or
public would be nice. I mean, we have a full team here. You know, the OPSB leads. I don't know. I prefer to have it public. So say, you know, you're in a demo or something, can point it to the URL. A customer asking how to, just say, here, we have it. I don't know. That's my personal point of view.
Okay. Well, we'll discuss it with Patrick's team to see if they're comfortable with the idea, and I can make it happen. I have multiple YouTube channels that can accommodate for that.
Okay, if there are no further questions, then I'm done with my presentation part, Alexei. And we
Okay,
can-
so let me stop the recording then. I'm already up